Hello, my name is David Arnott. I'm the Chief Commissioner at the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission. Our task in Saskatchewan is to promote, protect the human rights of all individuals. We're at the We Rise conference because we fully believe in the work you're doing. The work you're doing at this conference will have an impact not only in Saskatchewan, but I believe throughout Canada. This morning it is my distinct honor to introduce to you the Honorable Judge Marion Buller. I've known Judge Buller for over 20 years. She's a member of the Mistawasses First Nation here in Treaty 6 territory. She has a number of firsts. She was the first First Nations person appointed to the BC Provincial Court. She was the first person to create a First Nations court in British Columbia, and she established an Aboriginal family healing court in that province. She is a very highly respected jurist in this country. We have a common friend, Elder Kathy Lewis from Treaty 6 territory. Judge Buller led the inquiry into missing murdered Indigenous women and girls with courage, tenacity, strength, wisdom, and professionalism. She's been a champion for human rights and Indigenous rights in all of her professional career. She undertook a monumental task in leading the inquiry, and she did an excellent job, and she has a number of articulated calls for justice, which it behooves every one of us to understand and see implemented. I believe her contribution to Canada and to Indigenous people in this country is monumental, and I have great respect for her. Judge Marion Buller.
Tansei, hello. I'm Marion Buller. I'm coming to you from the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. That's also known as Vancouver, BC. Welcome to my home here, and thank you for welcoming me to your homes and your workplaces. I'm a proud member of the Mistawasses Nehewak, but I live here on the coast because I really don't like winter. For 22 years, I was a judge here in British Columbia, and then I went on to be the chief inquirer. Sorry, do you want me to start again?
Sure, let's go from the top.
Yeah.
So now, one thing with Mr. Wass is that my family actually, my mother grew up in Leask, Saskatchewan, and we were the Chinese family in town and owned the hardware store and the restaurant. Yeah.
I've been in there.
These were my grandparents and my uncle. So
small world,
small
eh?
world.
Yeah. Okay, I'll start again. Tansei, hello. I'm Marion Buller. I'm coming to you from the unceded, traditional, and ancestral home of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. I'm just a little bit outside of Vancouver, BC. I'm a member of the Mistawasses Nehewak, but I'm coming to you from the West Coast. Welcome to my home, and thank you for inviting me into your homes and your places of work. I want to thank the FSIN's Women's Secretariat, and especially Vice Chief Heather Bear, for inviting me to speak with you today and to meet with you. I also want to tell you that in addition to being a provincial court judge here in British Columbia for 22 years, and then the Chief Commissioner for the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, I'm a grandma, I'm a nokum, kokum, I'm a sister, I'm an auntie, I'm a niece, I'm a great auntie, I'm a stepmom, I'm a cousin. I think that's about it. I think I've named all my relations. My apologies if I missed anybody. Today, I want to talk about 3 areas regarding action plans. First of all, I want to pass along some reflections about what I've learned as a provincial court judge over the years about action plans and change. And also, I want to pass along some of my reflections from what I learned as Chief Commissioner for the National Inquiry. Then we're going to talk a little bit about change and how change can happen. And I'll give you some examples of what's been going on since the end of the national inquiry. And then we'll talk about some really concrete, practical aspects of building action plans. I have to tell you that from time to time, I will be looking down. I'm not playing video games and I'm not texting anybody. It's just that I have to refer to my notes from time to time. It's because there's so much really important stuff that I want to share with you today, and I really don't want to miss out on anything. So pardon me if from time to time I have to look down, like right now. Thank you. As part of my job as judge, and it was a real honor to be a judge, I have to add, I got to go and work on several of the circuit courts in British Columbia. Most notably, I got to spend a lot of time as the circuit court judge for the Northern Circuit. And this was a circuit that went to small communities along the BC Yukon border. I'm very grateful to the elders and community members who spent time with me, teaching me about their cultures, their traditions, their problems, and also their local solutions. I'm so grateful to them. I learned so much, and I hope I was a good student for them. One thing I learned from being a judge and from the elders and community members, and also my experience in life, is that local people know the problems and local people know the solutions. It's a matter of just trusting ourselves to move forward. So I want to share some of the things that I learned as I went along. At hearings that we held for the National Inquiry and elsewhere, as we did our work at the National Inquiry, we heard from many family members of lost loved ones and also survivors of violence. Of course, they shared their painful truths with us, and I'm forever grateful for the time that they gave us and their spirits that they gave us. It was wonderful. They gave so much to us, but what they did give us was the basis for our final report. Whenever family members or survivors shared their truths with us, we asked them, so what do you think we should tell the government? How should we recommend change? Or what could have happened to have made this situation better for you? And they all knew what the problems were, and they all knew what the solutions were. We heard from thousands of people from coast to coast to coast, and they all gave us their wonderful and very valuable advice. There were some similarities about recommendations and advice, but there were also some very important regional differences because, of course, what is important on the prairies may not be of the same importance in the far north. And, those regional differences are important to remember because we're not all the same. Family members and survivors of violence knew what had to be done to create safety for women, girls, and Two-Spirit people in their communities. For example, they knew that healthcare had to change. They knew that policing had to change. They knew that education had to change. And they knew how the change had to come about. The voices of the survivors and family members are strong in our recommendations in our final report. We called our recommendations calls for justice. And I just have to share with you a little story about that. We really didn't want to steal the importance of the TRC recommendations that were called calls to action. I have to remember to get that straight. We didn't want to piggyback onto the very valuable work that the TRC did. And so we thought we don't want to call our recommendations recommendations. That's just not right. And so we all thought about what some possible titles could be. our director of research, a tremendously talented and brilliant Indigenous woman, Dr. Corinne Duhamel, came up with the title Calls for Justice, because she said, you know, I've listened to what everyone has said and everyone wants justice. So that's just a little story about how we came up with that title for our recommendations. You know, most of all, what family members and survivors of violence told us is that we, as not only Indigenous people, but non-Indigenous people too, have to undo the damage that was done and continues to be done by colonization. The emphasis in making these changes and undoing colonization has to be on the strength of our Indigenous cultures, and we have to return women to their rightful places, their positions of power and strength in our communities. Those were their traditional places that have been lost, and as a result, women are unsafe, girls are unsafe. And you know, we also have to restore the traditionally accepted and respected position of Two-Spirit people in our communities. This need for decolonization was a key finding of fact in our final report. The ways to decolonize formed many of our calls for justice. And you know, this need to restore positions of power and influence, the traditional places for Indigenous women, that need formed the basis for our title of our final report. The title is Reclaiming Power and Place. That's what we need to do to make it safe for women, girls, and 2S people in our communities. Once again, you know, it's the truth. People knew the problems and the people knew the solutions to the problems. Since the release of our final report in June of 2019, much has and actually hasn't happened. We still don't have a national action plan. There have been some responses by the territories and the provinces. It's really hard to keep track of what's happened, though. There's no central place to find out what's going on. But you know, changes are being made at the community level already. And this is where it gets really exciting. Now, I'm going to contradict myself about provinces and territories, because there's one glowing exception to the work done in provinces and territories, and that's Yukon. Yukon is leading the way to make it safe for women and girls and 2S people in their communities. What have they done? Well, it's quite remarkable. After our final report was released in June of 2019, Yukon government formed a tripartite committee made up of members of the First Nation communities in Yukon, representatives of Yukon government, and representatives of women's organizations in Yukon. They hit the ground running, quite literally. They read our final report, they read the TRC report, and some other reports that are relevant as well. And then they went to communities all through Yukon during the summertime of 2019 and into the fall. And they met with community members everywhere and said, now what's important? What are the priorities here? What do you need to do to make it safe for women and girls and 2S people in your community, and actually safe for everybody in your community? They did this tirelessly. This is a huge job, but nonetheless, they kept at it. They came back and compared notes and started to write their final strategy for making it safe for Indigenous women and girls and 2S people in Yukon. I have to read this because I haven't memorized it yet, and it's really important. Their report is called Changing the Story to upholding dignity and justice, Yukon's MMIWG2S People Strategy. They came up with 4 main pathways. And again, I'm sorry I have to read this to you because I haven't memorized it yet, and it's really important. The first pathway is strengthening connections and support. Number 2, community safety and justice. Number 3, economic independence and education. And number 4, community action and accountability. They came up with 31 priorities spread out amongst these 4 headings or pathways. All of the priorities, all of the work is community-based and will involve community work. They also drafted a declaration that everybody will work together to make Yukon safe for Indigenous women and girls and 2S people. And everyone, every citizen in Yukon can sign on to that declaration. It's quite a document. And I strongly recommend that when you're able to Google or research on the internet, Google MMIWG Yukon, and you'll be able to access their full report. It's brilliant. It's so, it just almost brings me to tears. It's so beautifully done. There are lessons learned in their document, and I hope that you can find it valuable. Now, I want to tell you about the 4 sisters, another example of what's been happening since the National Inquiry. These are 4 sisters who spoke with me at one of our hearings. Now, they spoke in private, so I can't identify them or their community. I keep that trust very sacred. They told me about the tragic loss of their mother due to violence. And I'm grateful that they shared that with me. But almost as an aside, they added on that as a result of the loss of their mother and other women in their community, the community started to work on a type of community safety plan. But unfortunately, that plan got bogged down in politics and other issues in their community, and it kind of came to a halt. In the meantime, these 4 sisters, and my goodness, you could feel the energy when they walked into the room, they decided that before they could expect anybody else to clean up their acts, as they said, they had to clean up their own acts first, and that meant cleaning up their own homes, as they described it. Wow, I still remember it like it was yesterday. They decided in their homes there would be 0 tolerance for violence. So they made up new house rules, and I think I can remember them all. Their house rules included no hitting, no slapping, no punching, no fighting, no cussing and swearing, no stealing, no lateral violence, which means like no eye rolling, no calling anybody down. They said no gang insignia or anything of that nature, no drugs, no alcohol. And the bottom line was, if you don't like it, you can leave. It took a while for everybody to adapt to these new rules. And one of the sisters very candidly said the hardest thing she had to adapt to was the no cussing rule. And it took a while, but she kind of got over that one. This came up really as an aside. I've kept in touch with these 4 sisters since the National Inquiry, and they've given me some updates that are really quite interesting. They, after they got used to the rules, kind of challenged other families in their community to have 0 tolerance for violence in their own homes too, and to make up their own rules. And as families kind of got on board about 0 tolerance for violence in their own homes, then the discussion started again about developing a community safety plan. And it was like a log jam broke, because now, with the zero tolerance at home for violence, the focus of the community safety plan went from enforcing rules to peacekeeping, a more traditional Indigenous way of solving problems and keeping the peace. And it seems to be working. I hope to hear from them again soon, but it's always been good news. Another example of community-based change, where community members know the problems and they also know the solutions, actually took place in Winnipeg. The family members and survivors of violence in Winnipeg were not at all satisfied with how the Winnipeg Police Service, and to a lesser extent the RCMP, were investigating the deaths and murders of Indigenous women and girls, and the disappearances as well. The family members knew that really the problem was a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability. They just weren't getting updates, they weren't getting information, and this was making their anxiety even worse, as we all can imagine. So they reached out to the chief of police in Winnipeg, and he's a very open-minded person. And they developed new relationships with each other, more open, more accountable, more transparent relationships. And last year, the Winnipeg Police Service announced a whole new way of investigating MMIWG cases. And it was because of this relationship building between community members and the police services. Now, I have to say, we've gone from a large territory, but little communities in a large territory, to an urban center, to a small community, and the Four Sisters, whom I'll never forget. And in each case, people knew the problems, knew the solutions, got to work, and ultimately trusted their own judgment about what had to be done. It was a matter of confidence. I don't think I have to tell you this. Action plans don't just happen. They do require work. It's quite all right to make mistakes as you go along with your community action plan or your community safety plan, as long as you learn from your mistakes, like the Four Sisters community did. Action plans require relationship building and relationship nurturing, as the Winnipeg example shows. And what is common to all of these examples is the need to take a holistic approach that breaks down silos. As with the Four Sisters, again, to use them as an example, it's easy to get bogged down in politics, and it's easy to retreat into silos. But if you keep your goal on making safe places for women, girls, and 2S people, you will be okay. You will make it safe for them, however you define safety. I also want to pass along another reflection. I'm almost embarrassed to say that it took me and the work I did at the National Inquiry to learn that to think and act in silos is so contrary to our traditional Indigenous holistic view. It's a very colonial view. So enough of this lecturing. I know you're here to work on a regional plan and a plan for change. I look back on the work that we did at the National Inquiry and some of the other work that I've done. And there are three questions that seem to come up time and time again in this work. These are questions that people have asked in their communities. And you can define community however you like. It could be the people you live around. It could be people you work with. It could be people that you go to school with. However you define your community, that's fine. It's up to you. So the first question that we heard over and over again, and I'm not complaining, believe me, was what is creating a lack of safety for women, girls, and 2S people in our community? Now, we heard some interesting examples. In some parts of Canada, the lack of reliable cell phone service, for example, was creating a lack of safety. Really inappropriate street lighting, another one, was creating a lack of safety. But we also heard that inattentive police services, inadequate and unavailable health care, these were also creating a lack of safety in a community. And a lot of elders in particular said, our people, especially our young people, don't know our traditional teachings. They don't know our culture. And that's creating a lack of safety in our communities. We heard from chiefs and counselors as well who said, you know, sometimes our bylaws, our policies, our plans don't create safety for our women, girls, and 2S people. And so they ask a question at every meeting. How will this bylaw, this plan, this policy create safety for our women and girls? And if it doesn't, whatever it is, the policy or the plan, then back to the drawing board until that policy or plan does create safety for Indigenous women and girls. So once they identify the problems and they know what the problems are that are creating a lack of safety, then the next question is, which one will we start with? Every community is different. Priorities are different. Don't be afraid to trust your own judgment on where to start. And then the third question is, of course, what are the solutions? That I was saving the hardest one for last, I think. But, you know, it comes down to, from my experience anyway, what are the relationships that we need to build and nurture in order to make life safe and our community safe for Indigenous women, girls, and 2S people? Now, you may not want to ask these three questions, and that's okay. You may find other questions that have to be asked. Trust your own judgment on what you need to do. And I'm just, for those of you who are taking notes, I'm just going to repeat the three questions. So, what is creating a lack of safety for our women, girls, and 2S? It's the first one. Number two, which one will we start with? And number three, what are the solutions? In other words, what are the relationships that we have to build and nurture? So that's the end of, I hope, a not too boring lecture for you. I will make one recommendation for all of you, though, and that's to find a way to share your action plans with each other. You know, we have to build relationships amongst each other and share our experiences, maybe share our mistakes and the solutions as well. What works, what doesn't work. But, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. In fact, we don't have time to reinvent the wheel. Let's move forward. So I have the greatest of confidence in all of you that you know the problems in your communities, however you define your community. You know what is leading to a lack of safety for Indigenous girls, 2S people, women in your communities. You know the problems. You also know the solutions. And I have great confidence that you will find those solutions and you will do amazing work. We have to keep our eye on safety. And in closing, I want to say to all of you, stay well and stay safe. Thank you all so very much.